Hello, my name is Rosette Silva Briz, and today I'm going to talk to you about teaching English through translation and how it has evolved through history and why is it important to consider it in our practice as teachers. Translation through the years has evolved a lot. First of all, translation took place in Egypt, where Egyptians used translation to share with slave information. The Gilgamesh was translated into Asian languages by Buddhist monks. Then, the ancient Greece used translation to conquer the world as Romans. Saint Jerome translated the Bible into Latin and it became the official Catholic translation. It was a very important event in the translation history. Translation became a method of teaching a second language. Then, Gaspar Antonucci was a Yucatan Indian that interpreted between Spanish and Mayan for King Charles V. Sacagawea was the first woman hired as an interpreter. Alexander Burns was a British interpreter and a spy for the British military. Mark Twain published nearly 30 books, even though he was not a translator. Jorge Luis Borges was a very famous author, but he was also a talented translator. Translation became the major method for the target language teaching, used to understand and learn grammatical usage in the target language by providing meaning. Today, the necessity for integration of exploit instruction into communicative approaches has become obvious. Now we're going to discuss what is more important, translation or translating. Holmes contributed with his studies when translating became important on the 80s. Descriptive translation studies explains translation through a different diagram where product, process, and function are important. The practical approach of translating determines how to transfer the contents of the source into the target language. The linguistic model studies the linguistic resources of the source and target languages and saw the mechanisms available for it. The text linguistic model takes into account the various uses of language by speakers and writers in particular communicative situations. Sociocultural translation maintains that translation should always read like translations. It must be an oblique representation of the source, where translation should resist dominant target language cultural values. The computational models is where the computers are a tool for the human translator and then they provide different kinds of assistance. The psycholinguistic model, known as the Think Aloud Protocol, Lorcher claimed that the division of the translating process into 1. Understanding of the DST, transcoding SL into TL, and formulating TT. The interdisciplinary models has been found that exact equivalence between language 1 and language 2 exceedingly rare. As linguistic system, pragmatic constraints, word knowledge, and meaning systems all coverage in the act of translation. The critical approach presupposes a finished translation. It has to be said that not many translation theorists exist, as most publications in this field actually contain methods for translating. The frames are that we include reinterpretation of translator's environment, formulation of his own message, understanding, and creating an internal model of his world. Translation theory today shows us that it is mainly concerned with translation criticism. What we want to preserve in the source text has to do with the existence of overt and covert translations. Overt versus covert translation is that covert translation takes place when the translation is not marked as a translated text of a source text created in its own right. Overt translation includes different cultural presuppositions in the two language communities have to be taken into account. The freeing values and pragmatics is that textual knowledge is culture bound and it is extremely relevant for literary translations when translating text with ideological charge. Presupposition and inference play a great role in retrieving utterance meaning. The literary and specialist text. In real life, it is very difficult to notice that the rhetoric of fiction can be used in highly specialized publications. In this transformation, there are two operations that are present in all types of language: metonymy and metaphor. What does a translator have to have as competence? They have to have knowledge of the two language systems, but also communicative skills. The communicative knowledge is to know how to use language in a specific situation of interaction between humans. A common mistake is to believe that anyone can do this. But translating is not automatic. It has to be studied. Teaching translation is very important because it has become popular in the world as jobs has been created for interpreting and translating. But awareness of the importance of the different modes has increased too because it is extremely important. The goal of translation is the accurate use of a source language as a tool to communicate what it is supposed to say in a target language. The profile that translators have to have need to be focused on the practical aspects of total proficiency in their source language and in their target language together. The needed skills for them are mastery proficiency in the target language, excellent command of the translator's mother tongue, intelligence, mental effort, and linguistic skills. The social cultural knowledge is extremely important in translating. The translator is immersed in a kind of cultural transfer which requires to be bicultural more than bilingual. The difficulties are lack of proficiency in the target language, lack of proficiency in the source language, and lack of intercultural competences or sensitivity. The lack of proficiency in the target language is the source of translation errors that are not readily apparent, as syntax and lexicon are usually correct and the text makes sense. The lack of proficiency in the source language are where translators and interpreters must have a good command of their mother tongue. They have to use varied vocabulary and to recognize registers, punctuation, spelling, and collocations. The lack of intercultural competence or sensitivity is when translators or interpreters should be culturally open-minded because a text may show little awareness of the cultural context in which it is meant to be read. Why do we as teachers have to consider translation as a language teaching tool? Because translation is an additional tool to improve awareness of differences existing between the two languages system. Stern distinguishes between intralingual and cross-lingual dimensions, and the advantages of the cross-lingual exercises using translation as the main one are checking on accuracy, awareness of contents and form, and cognitive or psychological reasons. The recent approaches are the source said that analysis of translation will afford students a greater understanding of the second language and their mother tongue. Why is it important to consider the length of the text in the translation exercises? Long passages allow students to become aware of the importance of coherence, cohesion, appreciation of style, and therefore meaning in context and context, and the different ways in which this is achieved in both languages. But short texts may help them feel confident. The steps to translations are: 1. Preparatory exercises. 2. Parallel text. 3. Translating from the second language to the first language. And 4. Translating from the first language to the second language. We're going to mention some traps and pitfalls, like very long sentences, technical terms, ambiguity, redundancy, neologisms, non-second language words, abbreviations, currency, quotations, cohesion, and coherence. It is important to say why is more important, process versus the product. It is not the product, the final translation, that is important, but the whole process is important. Why? Because it used to be the case that after correcting the translations handed it, the teacher would hand out a fair copy of the translation. But the only advantage in it is that it can be used for contrast, if not considered infallible. The translation class is also the ideal opportunity for students to learn good dictionary skills. In professional translating, the meaning of the source text must be fully understood before translating. Now, as a conclusion, I can say that finally the use of translation in second language acquisition as a tool is important, but not an end in itself. It is just one of the many methods that exist to help students learn and appreciate a foreign language. It is recommended that translation, as briefly outlined here, should not to be used as a means of testing for grades that could kill the students' spontaneity and openness, essential ingredients for healthy language learning. It is a very important tool for our practice in teaching. Why? Because it is very useful and helpful for students and teachers to understand meaning. Thank you.